Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For decades, the Toxic Substances Control Act has operated under an unreasonable risk standard, which requires EPA to perform a cost-benefit analysis to determine whether or not a chemical is to be regulated. This approach has proven unworkable. Only 5 chemicals have been regulated under Section 6 of TSCA since 1976. Mr. Jones, you testified in November that EPA needs to have clear authority to assess chemicals against a risk-based safety standard and to take risk management actions when the chemicals do not meet that standard. Costs would still come into play in figuring out how best to regulate a chemical, but we shouldn't use cost to determine whether the public should be protected from a chemical exposure. Not only has EPA endorsed this risk-based approach, so have a broad range of stakeholders. At our last hearing in March, there was unanimous agreement among the witnesses that chemicals should be held to a risk-based safety standard. Mr. Jones, does the revised draft use a risk-based safety standard, or does it maintain a cost-based approach to risk?
It, Congressman, takes a risk cost balancing, which is pretty much the standard in TSCA right now.
So if this language were enacted, EPA would have to balance the economic costs of regulating against the adverse health and environmental effects of a chemical before establishing any protections. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'd like to explore how this would work in the real world. Let's say that this language is enacted and EPA evaluates a toxic chemical. Let's say that EPA determines that the chemical causes cancer. Before EPA would be able to take any action at all to limit the chemical's use in children's products, for example, EPA would need to weigh the costs to the industry of such action. Is that right?
That's correct.
So this proposal would require EPA to look at the cost to industry in determining whether to protect our kids from chemicals that cause cancer. Is that accurate?
We would have to take into consideration the cost to industry and any broader societal costs as well.
Okay. I think many in the public would listen to this discussion and find this proposal morally questionable. I share those concerns, and we don't need to take this approach. Time and again, we've shown that when there's a clear goal for protecting health, industry has the creativity and know-how to get the job done. I'm also concerned whether the approach in this draft is even workable. Is EPA good at projecting industry innovation? Will EPA give the proper weight to industry costs?
That's a great question, Congressman. We tend to have a very difficult time predicting where innovation is going, so we often, almost always, will predict the cost in the absence of innovation and then just straight line it out. Our experience, however, has shown that industry is incredibly innovative, and rarely do those costs hold over time. They typically drop off quite dramatically as industry innovates, and those costs go away.
So as a result, when you look at the costs, you end up overstating those costs because you really can't predict whether they're going to be innovative enough to hold down the costs.
That's correct.